The truth about the MCU is this, that it changed cinema, but not for the better, but for the worst. All of a sudden, films were being judged on their Rotten Tomato scores and box office Easter eggs, cameos, and post-credit scenes. Films weren't being judged for being good or bad or indifferent films. All of a sudden, it was easy to get away with calling a film great, calling an MCU movie the bestest ever, because it had a high Rotten Tomatoes score and a huge box office, and no one was looking too closely on what the actual Marvel Cinematic Universe films were from film to film. And this is what films were being judged by, and all of a sudden, directors like Zack Snyder were being kicked from pillar to post verbally. And you know, Zack makes great cinematic movies, makes high art, but all of a sudden, making great movies wasn't good enough. It was about your post-credit scenes, your Easter eggs, and your Rotten Tomato scores, and your box office. This is now what films are being judged by, thanks to the MCU. It means Kevin Feige and company didn't have to make great films. Now, prior to the 2016 apocalypse, cinema was still judged by cinema. Films were actually judged for the films. But because the Marvel Cinematic Universe was a franchise, and a successful one at that, people were giving the films an actual pass. Now, when the MCU started in 2008 with Jon Favreau's Iron Man, that was a proper film. That was cinema. It starred a movie star, Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. had come out of prison for being involved with drugs. He was a bit of a high risk, and they brought him on as Tony Stark. Now, people say this was a very brave piece of casting by Kevin Feige. I don't think it was. This guy was one of the great actors before he went into prison and ruined his career. He played Charlie Chaplin. It's his greatest performance of all time. He should have at least been nominated for an Oscar for this film, and he wasn't. He's now not remembered for playing Chaplin. He's remembered for playing Tony Stark, and playing Tony Stark isn't his greatest achievement. But he was a great Tony Stark, a great Iron Man, and there's no question about that. And the MCU was successful mainly by the casting of Robert Downey Jr. And it's interesting to look at the state of the MCU now without Robert Downey Jr. and the state with him in it. It's clear that Robert had a huge involvement in how these films were made and how they were executed. It's a very interesting situation, and it now makes sense why he left as Iron Man and Tony Stark when he did. So the Marvel Cinematic Universe did change the way we looked at movies. If a film had a huge Rotten Tomatoes score, if critics said it was a good film, it was a good film. There's very few good Marvel Cinematic Universe films, and everyone was judging the DC Extended Universe on these parameters as well. And when you've got an auteur like Snyder making proper high concept cinematic movies, that's very, very problematic. All of a sudden, if a film wasn't made for the mainstream audience, it wasn't a very good film. But back in the day when I was growing up, the days of, you know, De Niro and Costner in The Untouchables, and the Godfather trilogy, and E.T. and Back to the Future, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Indiana Jones franchise, Star Wars. It didn't matter if you were part of a franchise. Your individual movies actually had to be good. As I say, the Marvel Cinematic Universe doesn't really have many great movies that you can watch again and again and say, wow, this is fucking cinema. And I'd say Captain America and the Winter Soldier is fucking cinema. Individually, without it being part of a franchise, it's a really good movie. But that isn't typical of what the Marvel Cinematic Universe was. As I say, Iron Man. Now, Iron Man 2 may not be a good movie. In fact, it's a crap movie, and compared to BVS, it's even worse. BVS is a great sequel for a franchise, and as a movie, it's fucking unique. Iron Man 2 is a piece of shit, but at least it was made as cinema, as was The Incredible Hulk, as was the first Captain America, the first Avenger, the first Thor. etc., etc., etc. Then they did the first Avengers. That was a great movie. But then we leaped to Iron Man 3, which made a fucking joke of the Mandarin. The Mandarin. And all of a sudden, you know, the MCU became this franchise that opted for the cheap laugh. And, you know, the kind of, you know, the superhero element, but not making a good film. All of a sudden, after the first Avengers, it wasn't about mainly making great movies. It was just about making the next chapter. So, as I say, this is how cinema changed. So, the movies you go and watch today are not judged on being great movies, as long as they're ratified by the Access media in the reviews, and their Rotten Tomato scores are great and their box office is solid or extraordinary. Everyone calls them the bestest ever, and they're great movies. And all of a sudden, the MCU had this great reputation. Everyone asked me what went wrong with the DC Extended Universe. The MCU went wrong with the DC Extended Universe, because without that franchise, Zack Snyder's movies would have been deemed as great high art. Now, a couple of years ago, Martin Scorsese did an op-ed for the New York Times calling out the Marvel Cinematic Universe and saying it's not cinema. Now, Access Media tried to say that he was throwing in the DCEU in this as well. He wasn't, because Scorsese knows what Snyder was doing was fucking cinema. The guy was trying to make great cinema, but the Marvel movies are not. And this is the truth about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's barely a cinematic universe anymore. And, you know, when the Marvel Cinematic Universe started, it was a great thing because it was as well as the other great variety of movies we got. But today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has created a dictatorship, and it's destroyed variety in cinema because studios said, get me some of that, get me one of them, get me a successful franchise rather than making great movies. This is what happened at WB Pictures when Emmerich saw what was going on over at Disney. I want that. I don't want great movies. Let's destroy Zack Snyder's Justice League and create Justice League. And we saw what happened with that. The DCEU was something very unique with its own identity, and if they left Snyder to do what he wanted to do, everyone would have been proud of it by now. People keep on saying the DCEU is a mess. It's only a mess now because what happened, because the studio got nervous and wanted their very own Marvel Cinematic Universe. And where are we now? David Zaslav saying he wants something similar to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think that would be a mistake, and I hope he understands now that's not what DC should be. And when we look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe today, it's very different to what it was when it first started. Phase 4 has been absolutely terrible compared to the first 3 phases. You know, the quality of the movies and the streaming service content has been absolutely terrible, mundane, and underwhelming. The quality of the VFX and the CGI, terrible. The writing, the directing, the storytelling, and now where we are today. We had this huge announcement the other day about Deadpool 3 bringing back Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Everyone's fist bumping. A few hours later, we find out that the new Blade movie has lost its director. The real reason that Hugh Jackman announcement was made. So while you were all celebrating Hugh returning as Logan, the real story was that Kevin Feige has driven another director away from Blade. Now, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been very lucky in the sense that most of its characters and films it's made haven't been made before in an iconic way. But the first 2 Blade movies starring Wesley Snipes are very iconic, and Blade fans love those movies. And this Blade movie will be compared to that. So you can't make a Blade movie in the same way you make another MCU movie. It has to have action. Now, Jeff Snyder, a very good, reliable journalist, says there's a 90-page fact script for Blade, but it only has 2 terrible action sequences in it. So that film is an absolute mess. What are they going to do? Quickly bring an iconic director like Sam Raimi, like they did with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, rush it through, and we saw what happened with that movie. Not a bad movie, but not a great movie either. You can't do that with Blade. Now, I can tell you the star of that movie who's playing Blade, and I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not going to bother, is that far away from quitting that movie. Because all of a sudden, the Marvel movies are made in a very lazy, way, an underfunded way. We have heard VFX artists complaining about their treatment. Kevin Feige hasn't even answered to these accusations. As I say, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has become a dictatorship, and the dictator is Kevin Feige himself. He's in a little bubble, he's protected, he's not answering to all these criticisms, and he should, because he's protected by the fact that he executed the most successful, cinematic franchises of all time. But success doesn't mean you've actually made great, memorable movies. In the most part, Kevin Feige hasn't made memorable movies. But as long as you've got those Rotten Tomatoes scores and that impressive box office, nobody questions you anymore. And this is what's happened, and this is how cinema has changed, and it's changed for the very worst. So now everyone's jumping about Hugh Jackman's Wolverine Logan coming back, and it's about that star appearance. It wasn't Kevin Feige who you can boast about the value of Jackman's Wolverine and Logan. It's Bryan Singer, who did 2 great movies. He's a shitty person in real life, but a great fucking director. He knew jack shit about Marvel. He knew even less about Wolverine and the X-Men. He studied up and he made 2 great movies. Back then, you had to actually make good movies, because the best Marvel content isn't in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's prior to the MCU. This is the truth of the matter. The first 2 X-Men movies, Sam Raimi's first 2 Spider-Man movies. I love Ang Lee's Hulk movie. A lot of people hate that movie, but it's very Zack Snyder type. It's very different, unique, high concept, artistic, and I love it. The Incredible Hulk is a great movie. It's part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it doesn't really feel like an MCU movie. But as I say, the best Marvel movies were prior to the MCU. So this is what we've got now. This is where cinema is. They murdered the summer blockbuster. There is no summer blockbusters. Hollywood has been struggling this summer because of their own decisions, and they're crying, blaming audiences, and now they're all indebted. They're all in big trouble. They tried to say that streaming was the future. You've read a lot of articles yourselves. I know you have. You understand now that streaming isn't the future. And now they're relying on cinema again. But we need the summer blockbuster. And we've got to stop with these franchises. We've got to stop saying that every movie needs to be, you need to track the general audience. Many films that were made when I was growing up weren't for the general audience, but the general audience embraced them. David Cronenberg's Dead Ringers, that stars Jeremy Irons, our very own DC Extended Universe Alfred, as twins. He played both parts. And it was an amazing study on 2 people having to separate. And it was an amazing film. The public embraced that film. The Fly, an amazing film again. It's another David Cronenberg movie. It's an amazing film. That film wasn't made for the mainstream audience, but the mainstream audience embraced that. But now everyone wants to see another version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and no one's been able to do that. And maybe that's a good thing. But with the Marvel Cinematic Universe in trouble now, and they are in trouble, and the announcement of Hugh Jackman returning as Logan doesn't change that, because let me tell you the truth about that film. They don't have a clue what to do with that 3rd movie. I spoke about this on yesterday's show, on this very channel. Ryan Reynolds and Kevin Feige have disagreed up to this point about everything that Ryan wanted to do with this movie. So what have they got? After all this, what have they got? They're bringing back a very popular version of a Marvel character from movies that had nothing to do with Kevin Feige. I know the X-Men movies, Kevin had some kind of production credit, but he's not the reason those two movies were really good. Bryan Singer was the reason those two movies were really, really good. So cinema has changed, because when you don't judge a movie on its content and you're judging it on its Rotten Tomatoes score and its box office, you've got a huge problem. And as I say, you can't judge cinema on these things. And this is what happened to Zack Snyder. And now he's over at Netflix and he's going to make a couple of great Rebel Moon movies. And that's going to put pressure on Disney and Kathleen Kennedy's Star Wars. It's going to be interesting what happens there, because I think the paradigm shift is going to change again. Because the Marvel Cinematic Universe gave cinema a paradigm shift. And it said you don't have to make great movies. They just have to have the right stats to them. Because movies and entertainment have become about stats. As I'll repeat again, they have become about what your Rotten Tomatoes scores are and what your box office are, but not how good your movie are. And this has become very, very damaging for the industry. And money has left, because what Disney and Marvel have done, they've basically blocked other movies from being shown when their movies are being shown, and Marvel movies take more screens. But there's a bigger paradigm shift now, because what they're trying to do now is take the MCU away from cinema. Yes, something called the Marvel Cinematic Universe is basically its future, and all of Disney's future is going to be on Disney Plus. Well, you know, while the other studios are trying to get back to embracing the theatrical system. This is a little arrangement they've all made together, that Disney, Amazon and Netflix get the streaming game and the rest leave the streaming game alone and go back to embracing the theatrical system. And that's what's going on right now. But our mentality as an audience has to change, because if all you want is a Marvel Cinematic Universe type movie, then you're not going to get very much. If all you want is a cameo and an Easter egg and a great post-credit scene, but you don't want a great movie, that's problematic. We have Black Adam in the DC Extended Universe coming up at the end of October. This is going to be a proper old-fashioned superhero movie with 3 acts, great visuals and a great story. And fingers crossed, a great Henry Cavill Superman post-credit scene. But what's more important, and I think this is an important thing to say as well, I've heard people say, do what Marvel have just done, make the announcement, announce Cavill as Superman in that movie. No, no, no. Because this is a Black Adam movie, and The Rock deserves his place in the fucking sun. And Superman, as you can see, is my man. He's my character. I love him. He's been my character since the first day I watched my first film, Superman the movie, but that's not the point. We don't want to break the internet. I keep on hearing people saying the DCEU needs to break the internet. No, it doesn't. It needs to make good fucking movies. And most of the DC Extended Universe movies are not good movies. They're great movies. There's a lot of good cinema in that franchise. But as I keep on repeatedly saying, the MCU has changed that. You don't have to be good cinema anymore. You just need the right stats. And that, my friends, is what cinemas become. And that is wrong. We need to get back to demanding great cinema. This year, we had a great animated movie, The Rise of Gru. Minions, The Rise of Gru. And we had a great live action movie called Top Gun Maverick, focusing on the movie. Of course, it continues from the first Top Gun movie, but it wasn't about doing anything else but making a great movie. We have to leave the MCU mentality behind, because that studio is in a fucking mess. They've overstretched themselves. They've gone in a direction that's not going to work out for them. And I believe the inception of the DCEU was the right way to go. And if Zaslav has any sense, he'll embrace that situation. This has been Movies TV Man with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection, and I'll see you again in the next video. Until we see each other again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.